Hey there, everybody. Brian Levering here. And today I'm going to talk a little bit on the sources of magic as I understand it in this plane and the way to work with energy on any particular plane that you might happen to be on or on any particular world should society be able to advance so far as it could reasonably engage in universal transit between universe A, universe B, universe C, etc. And what's interesting, I find, is that there are the opportunities to have deeper conversations about conversion of energy and principles in action. And so, with one of those things, Sir Terry Pratchett came up with the Discworld series. And Peter Carroll, the father of chaos magic, back in the 1960s, evoked the chaos current. He was his concepts are the same kind of thing on which I build my foundations. So what I'm going to cover is the work that I was doing yesterday to shore up my work with time and the various sources that I use, so that way I can conceive of how things can relate, and by the relation to those things, so as we move into the dimensional tarot, or how to read from a different perspective so you can figure out what energies and conversions that you want to do. Now, in this, I'm not going to so much get into the 12 personality types or the 12 stories or the experiences or even the behaviors and stuff. That's going to be for the section on the dimensional tarot. But this is going to be the framing of the sources of creation. Okay, so I've talked about it before. We're in the world of light. You can see things, you can understand things. The world of darkness would be when you close your eyes, right? You can only hear and perceive. You have to do so with energy. Okay, so you have the internal world of darkness, and then you have the external world of light. And you have to think about it in terms of your spirit is fully aware of everything, right? It's the electricity that moves between your brain cells, connecting the little dots inside your head, lighting up the different regions of your brain so that different parts of your body can interact and engage in the same kind of ways. So that as you continue to grow and as you develop, you have these greater applications for things. And by applications for things, it's an understanding of conversion of energy in space and time. So when you're working with the flow energy, right? I've talked about yang energy as the active energy. It's going to produce a heat response. Yin-based currents is stuff that's going to go in, so much so that it creates a cold sensation. So if you ever do energy work and your hands get cold, that's the sort of thing. The same thing also is produced when you study it like Peter Carroll talks about in the Octavo, the sorcerer scientist that he created, right? He pulled all the math systems based on the magical techniques. And so I'm very much a thaumaturgist. I'm very much about creating energy and resonance and the application for those things, so long as we get the opportunity to engage and describe what it is we're trying to do, and we can conceive of what's supposed to happen, right? Because there's this concept of the narrative of form, and there's a spell of narrative that Peter Carroll uses in the Octavo, which I'm going to get into, but the conversation that he's talking about, that's the thing that I've done the last year's worth of work to try to develop and produce examples of what can happen if it's not kept in check, or the things that if you just let your imagination run wild in the marketplace to see what happens, that would happen, right? So what we get the opportunity to do now is sit back and reflect. And so this is my reflection of that. And that as I reflect, I hope that it provides some understanding that time, in relation to the experience, when we're experiencing a thing, how we experience it, the energy that moves through us, is the energy on which magic is built. So it's to that study, to that wholeness of being, when you can be so full of energy, your entire body is shaking mad, when you don't know what's going to happen because you're bursting with potential energy, right? Those are behavioral triggers. Those are links. Those are fullness of potential, right? When you have somehow compressed enough events, enough emotions, enough fury, enough rage into a single solitary idea, that bam, you can release that. And from that release, you have the emotional output to create the sorceries that you're trying to do that'll change the fate of the people around you. Now, I use the anchors of the planets, the astrological forces, the directions, the elements, the yin ingredients to create those paths of flow in order to be able to stabilize those things. So it doesn't matter how fucked up I am inside, I can create a space external to my own that I can work like a laboratory experiment. I can put the spell totem on it. I can birth the spirit through it. I can release that spirit into the world through this nexus point of creation, not because of the work that I'm doing, but because the work of creation itself will lend itself to these things because we're just filling energy into patterns. We're creating a pattern that the energy will fill. We're giving it a body and we're plugging it in. So this is how time works, and the math mechanics behind it is based on Peter Carroll's work. And I'm going to get into it. I'm going to get into the weeds, and there's going to be some quotations and stuff. For the majority, it's directly out of his work, but I do have some of my overlay mechanics into it. So as I study with time, and as I study the different relationships between things like the Lost Book of Enki, right, where you have a separate planet that operates at a scale of 1 day there is 30 days on Earth as we know it. And you have on things like Discworld, where Peter Carroll gets into the same density of Earth, only it's flat on the back of 4 elephants on a turtle that's flying from space. The conjecture is in his book that it's a separate planet in our same universe. It's just, or in our same space hypercube, but it isn't in the same universe as the Milky Way per se, right? Because it operates at a different rate of light speed. So he's got it figured at a 200-mile-an-hour light speed. So that 200-mile-an-hour light speed conversion, stage it up to hours in this plane, is 186,000 miles per second. I don't know. I had math in here. Anyway, we'll get into that. But my memory is shit right now, so I do apologize. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into the reads. So, like I said, Sir Terry Pratchett and the Discworld series, and with Peter Carroll's work in Octavo, on page 92, he gives the Minkowski principle, which we're using this to include for time. Okay, and so I'm going to get into what all of the weeds are on this thing, right? So we're going to start with the a squared plus b squared plus c squared, right? That's to give you the basic formula of the Pythagorean like cube, right? Like you get to figure out what it is you're trying to find within a particular dimension in space. You're trying to find something somewhere. You're trying to identify an energy source. You're trying to be able to conceive of a time and a place. Okay, so we need to account for time. All right, but we need to first know the light speed of whatever universe we're in currently, so that if we're in, say, the Milky Way, time is operating at a constant on Earth that we know as 9.8 meters a second. Right, all of this stuff we have to also account for unobservability, the stuff that we don't understand. So that's where I comes in. So we have space-time, we have where we're trying to locate, we have the unidentifiable stuff, we have the light speed of wherever it is that we're at, and then we have the time and the placement in the particular cube of understanding. So that we get location in space. So we get the little X marks the spot. Okay. Now, it goes on to say that for the sake of simplicity, it does not show the curvature of dimensions of space-time, and it makes no significance in weak or greater gravity, when you consider that there is a cube space, okay? There is what we know in the one, where we're currently and where we need to go, okay? So we have to understand time as a direction of measurement, okay? So you can either move forward or you can move backward. There's a progression. In the Codex Arcanum series, what I've done with the help of Julie Gatfield and Fatima Walsh back in the early 2008, when we were trying to do the Orders of the Templi Knox Corporation, and they were the first ones to really help me start on all this math and all these projects. What we developed was an understanding of conditions and protocols for the way that energy moves in space. And so we start with X over here, okay? This is the perception of action as it acts on Y, which is the dimension where the outcome occurs, okay? So this little circle here, which is kind of hard to see, is your spell itself, okay? Your spell creates a sort of black hole wave particle, all right, that it transmits the energy from this world back into the world where, let's say, the mirror dimension, and it comes back through where it has to gather all of the intangibles together on both sides. So in this world and the other world, and bring them together to form the junction point in the center. So this center point here, the wave pattern, is the origin of flow as it interacts in a three-dimensional hypercube. Okay, we're going to say 4 dimensions when it rotates. Okay, which plane you're on inside those 9 dimensions in that rotation gives you the principle of the 13 planes. Okay, because each one of the 4 states, as I define it as the heaven, the earth, the ghost, the human, right? In those 4 states, you then have the ability to observe action before you cast a spell, before you issue a thought, before you issue orders to the spirit that you command. And by understanding the return from that, as you connect the lines in your consciousness in that divination moment, to see what would happen if you let your thoughts run rampant, if you let that energy be released in full, and why you have to hold back from full manifestations if it's not going to go the way that you want during the time of observation. Okay, so this requires awareness and understanding, and to work through the thought process of, this is the world I'm in, this is the world I want to go to, my spell is the thing that's going to get me there. The pattern it creates is the flow between these 2 moments, so that at the nexus point, that fold occurs and I exactly exist within that point of manifestation. My will is done, the gate is open, the threshold is crossed, and I am now in a new dimension. Whatever that dimension is will respond accordingly to the narrative of form, or to the story that it's given, based on how you pull the particles together into alignment around you. Now, those free-floating particles are identified in the disk world as a chemical element called narratium or narrativium, right? But in our universe, as we understand it, it's the spell of narration, okay? But to understand the spell of narration, we have to first understand the spell of entanglement and magical linkage. Okay, Peter Carroll goes into this really, really in depth in the Octavo book, right? The entanglement math is this calculation, okay? And it occurs where a light path exists between events separated by space, not necessarily by dimension. I'm talking about dimensions with this energy. We're talking about physical space-time where that dimensional energy is coming out of. So as it comes out of your spell into the world. So this magic bridges the dimensional flow as you're producing it. Okay, so this is why you use the anchors and create that external space. So that way, in that space outside yourself, you have established yourself and the thing you're trying to create. So that way you can understand time as a positive flow forward and time as an ending. So the Mayans understood time as a flow forward. They had the giant clock that could calculate absolutely everything until 2012. Okay. 2012, new things began to happen. Once I was able to interact with the nature and the things that I've been able to learn with them as a result, studying with the spirits of the gods of time or the Titan of time, specifically letting his consciousness just kind of run rampant for a while in the back of my own mind and trying to understand what it is that time can represent if we think about it not just as a linear construct, but also as a thing that we can manipulate directly through the implications of generating energy through these levels of output. So we can control through mechanics and mathematics the application of energy in action. So what we produce, we create. We become responsible for the things that we put in an anchor situation. So when we're doing a spell for a client, when we're doing a work for a friend, when we're doing these things and we're using these principles of compression to overlay reality one on top of another, we're doing it through these basic principles. Okay, so again, we can get into on page 94, he gets into the math of the superposition or possibilities. Okay, and then you can move sideways through imaginary time. You've got spatial distance, temporal separation, imaginary separation. Okay, and in my own work to create and study the flow to and from the movement through the ritual creation, in this book here, I've got the intent plus will and direction equals form calculations. All right, I don't have the pages queued up. I should, but I'll get to those later. But this is the calculation of spell overlay from a thing to a new dimension using the spell itself. And you can use the sphere of time to be the spell itself. What is the duration of the spell? How long does it last? Well, it lasts as long as it needs to in order to get the conditions met where it can operate in all 12 sectors at once. And by 12 sectors, I mean the 12 understandings. Those are going to be the moments of time that are divided into the 12 understandings of the zodiac. If you understand the energy of the zodiac overlay, okay, so in example, Skyrim, back in 2012, 2011, I was working with this gal named Bridget and a lady named Kishara on Pagan Space when the Grimoire of Arts first came out, when I was working on dimensional concepts with them. Overlaying their gods and giving them the ability to bring the dark god of Skyrim into this particular plane through the creation of a vessel similar to the one that is described in the Dragon Book of Essex, where you create the blood medium, you give it worship, you give it reverence, and you give it an elevation, similar to what they do in Palo and Santo and the divine elevations of the saints, right? When you receive the saints in a vessel, well, you duplicate the same thing by overlaying what is in their universe under the 12 aspects of heaven, right? What are the 12 stars in our universe? What are the 12 zodiac signs in their universe? And then you overlay them together in a single ritual. And that ritual, once you understand where the energy comes from and where it's going, you then have the opportunity to manifest whatever it is that you want. So you can bring forth whatever god you desire from whatever planet you desire from whatever world you want. It's just the form that it takes is limited to the body it's permitted to inhabit based on the rules of incarnation, on the available energy for that planet, which is based on these calculations that Peter Carroll gets into, where everything is, at the end of the day, the compression of a math problem. The extrapolation of the universe can be defined through the application of math problems, because that is the absolute compressed, this little thing does so much, right? So those little ingredients can output so much. And so you have to study the principles of ubiquity. So by studying that, you have to understand what is energy in those states. What are the entropies of those states? What is the useless, unreadable information that comes out of a thing. What makes it crap, right? That's the thing we're trying to distill from information. That's the thing we're trying to distill. So that way, when we're trying to determine the surface area of humanity, as Carol describes it, the individual surface area of a human as a flesh being is the social boundaries, the geographical boundaries, the financial boundaries, the mental boundaries. So that way, through my work of opening the void, I then can access information that's viable and valuable given the current considerations as they relate to the entropy within the system. And so while I'm studying time, my own mind, my own story, and what I think is my story, trying to unfuck the origins of the dubious relationship that I have with my parents and my adoption, and the weird things that I can't account for in my youth as far as loss of time, right? By casting a spell in the conversational method, this is how I account for it now. So I use an array, which is a flat world, right? It is the disk world in application. I build that out of ingredients made out of bones, metals, herbs, minerals, whatever it is that I can get my hands on that's going to replicate the same energy on the atomic level that I'm looking to replicate here, so that I have a thing where I can pull that energy out of at the time of use, okay? Then I have the moment of sympathy, that understanding of what that use will do. Whatever words or thoughts, sounds, conjurations, bells, whatever that's going to cause that same environment to occur. You can do it on a ritual on a battlefield. You can do it in a church. You can do it in a bathroom if you're masturbating. Doesn't matter. You can create the energies of those expressions that you're looking for. Then you get the intended outcome. What do you want to do? What do you want it to become? Okay. And then you have to know, now that it's become that thing, what is it going to behave like in that world? This is the path of spirit. This is the illumination, right? The path of the sun. What is it going to become? What is it going to be in the world of light? And then the application of that expression as it feeds back into where it came from in the flat, into the physical world as it expresses its own spirit and actions. What will it behave like in time? That life expression, what does it do as a response? How does it choose to respond after that point? And then after it's responding, how does it transform? How does it grow? How does it relate to the caster as the caster is going to do it? How is it going to relate to the through line of unity from the divine origin of Yang that they've connected to back at this point here as it relates to the will of the creator that they are expressing in that time of creation through their magic itself in that moment? And then how does it create that entropy? How does it create those unknown states? And then from that, what are acceptable levels of entropy? What are you okay with happening? What are you not okay with happening? And then how are you going to be okay with that as you think about it in the 9 planes of the hypercube? And then how do you internalize that in the 9 layers of thought that I've gotten into in earlier lessons? And then how do you rectify that with the energy of the 9 planes, which I'm going to be getting into more after we go through the dimensional tarot to be able to see and observe what's going on around you, right? So if you put these together, you get roughly 9,477 different types of stories, or nearly 10,000 things that you can do and study based on all of these potential outputs. So in the study of the I Ching and in the study of the trigrams between the yin and the yang principles, they also omit that third state of being between the heaven, between the earth, and between the spirit. So that way you can calculate which dimension that you're in based on a 9-layer approach to understanding. So if you include all of these various things, you can then calculate the energy of magic, and you can calculate the thong as Carol describes it, okay? This is the calculations on which you can do that, all right? Individual horizons consist of all things that they know, and the experienced and such horizons as they are for the energy output. So he describes what I said as what I do, right? By creating all of this, by applying the concepts of dimensional overlay, it can consist of all that you know and all that you have experienced, right? So these are basically using your experiences as a battery, all right? This is how you intend to do it on purpose, okay? And then the integrated information, it's going to be the same amount when you do the spell. So why not do the spell with your wholeness of being, okay? So it's going to produce the same level of effect of demand on you. You have to know what it's going to do, why it's going to do it, and how it's going to do it. But you need to be able to understand the compression of energy and the density of energy as you understand the planets, the stars, the elements, the behaviors of the yin ingredients, the behaviors of the yang ingredients, as they relate to you in the spirit, as they relate to you in the flesh, as you're creating the moment, as you're layering all of these things. Because they've already determined that entropy can be overridden by virtue. Because virtue and seeking things of virtue, things that are of a higher purpose, that have a through line of unity, will produce better results towards your future and towards the application of what it is you're trying to do as the outcome of creation. Right? And so seeking then that the great work lies in creating more high quality information than entropy. So the more dense and the more layered the information that we produce in the great work itself. So as I create these lessons and these courses based on these types of mathematical equations, right? So that way we can calculate integrated information into various systems. We can then produce from those systems constants and equivalence to study the ubiquity principles, to study gravity, and to study the various relationships. And so I was trying to determine, and they figured that the density of Earth, right, is 5.51 grams per cubic centimeter. Okay, so for every 5.51 grams in a cube of space, all right, we'll have all of that together has produced a gravity of 9.807 meters per second squared, right? And based on the planets, right, and between the reading of the Lost Book of Enki, so that's the calculation for Earth. But you have to figure if it's a 30-to-1 principle, then it's about 30 times the rate or size, right? So it actually produces less energy overall. So there's less magic there than there is on smaller places. So the smaller the places, the higher the magic, right? So Discworld has a lot more flow constants, if you would, all right? So if you can figure out how to tap into those, again, these are the calculations for vortification. So I talked about it earlier in the study for flow mechanics, where you can study and you can apply various calculations to how things move through various spaces, okay? So you're looking at roughly the calculations that he's come up with is 0.006 arc seconds per century of information that's viable if you're studying black holes. Okay. And again, we're looking at a 9-dimensional hypercube. We're looking in 9 dimensions of space, trying to find a single point of origin. This is math to determine universal location. This is not math to determine the individual moment in a spell. That's why you need the planets. That's why you need the elements. That's why you need the source materials for that planet as it manifests on the world that you're experiencing. So if we get to be a stellar species, it doesn't matter what planet you're on, you can use these same similar calculations to determine energy, entropy, and the information that you can provide, right? So that way you can understand that even though Discworld's light speed is only 200 miles an hour, it's at some different location in the hyperspherical universe, further away from whatever central core is allowing light to travel at 186,000 miles per second in a total vacuum. It's slightly less than air, right? But again, this is on page 74 of Carroll's work. And so we can then study entropy deeper. We can study entropy and the information in entropy using the stuff that the Bekenstein-Hawking's equations came up with, which you're probably not interested in that today. And go study time theory and relative theory as it relates to the black holes. But in relation to magic, you basically can break it down based on how to calculate energy at various rates per second. So while I'm using a 30-to-1 principle, considering this is just theoretical applications, just to give a thought construct, right? It might not be accurate today, but it's a starting location of saying, hey, look, there's math that's available for different planets. This is how we can start looking at it. And we can start looking at some of these kinds of space-time calculations to figure out different assumptions, different ways to study the relative locations of light speed, different locations between the relationships of the disk world or between the disk and the round. So that way you can find the ratios that are different. It's 50 here, it's only 1 over here. But if the Earth that we know is on Nibiru, right, it would be 1 here to 30 here to 50. So it goes 1, 3, 5, right? So what's 50 times the effect here, I'm sorry, 50 times the effect here to 1 effect here is still 30 times the effect as it would be over here, right? So it's those relationships, those things which can be studied, okay? And it's the application of mental maneuvering. So Carroll defines magic as the generation between gnosis, link, the subliminalization, and the belief. Okay, I don't define it like this. He's defining it in a way that it seems to be an overarching theme of how to do it in the general sense. I like to think of those arc seconds. I like the nitty-gritty, individual, very, very specifics. Okay, this is why my work accounts with the 13 zones of time, right? To get onto the prime planet, we have to know the 12 zones of time, but then we're still operating as a life form upon the spell's interaction of the world that we're going to be interacting on. So this then becomes the spell itself in the array that we set up. Our body becomes the channel and vessel for this one, and the relationship between the spell then becomes a 3-dimensional hypercube in relation to us embodying world A, working on world B, creating, in fact, a 6 spherical rotation, right? So you've got to figure 4 rounds of worlds rotating around a single node in space that you're conjuring, that you're creating when you're creating these moments of magic, of states, to be able to access the 4 doors, the 4 directions, to be able to determine your God state within those moments. So that way, yes, you can achieve gnosis. Yes, you have achieved link. Yes, you have achieved subliminalization because you know all of the things that you're doing. And because you feel it, because you know it to be fact, because all of those things are true, your belief is true. Magic has been generated. So his calculation is not wrong. It's just how you get to it, or how I get to it, is the path that I have undertaken in order to be able to bridge the spirit and the mind to be able to handle these various correspondences, right? So that way we can look at the 8-source unification theory that I'm working on through the applications of temperature, heat, time, distance, space, right? The very specific calculation of energy as it creates magic, right? And in relation to that magic, what is it that we do as a relation to the outcome? So do we want to do things for positive effect? Do we want to do things for negative effect? Do we do things because they are the application of various mythos in reality, right? We do those things because we choose to do them in the moment of our doing. Whatever it is, we open ourselves up as an intermediary between this creation and the thing we're trying to do. So that way we can become the creator, we can become the created, we can become the path of creation, and all things in that moment, we touch on the divine spark. And through that divine spark, we have created those paths and moments of manifestation so that we can actually achieve those alchemical states of union, right? So that the mercury, the spirit within is the mind. It becomes the gold. The sulfur is the body. It becomes the reflection of the gold. So the mind is the thing. The body is the reflection of the thing. And the vital salt is the blood that connects us. Okay. So in that way, we have a physical alchemy. We have a path of becoming that allows us to really embody all of these various states. And so that way, as we move through it, we can understand ritual in a different way. So these are higher level techniques that allow for, say, for example, you're going to establish a gate, right? Well, when you make the conjuration, the one that I used to use is we are three in the past, in the future, and forever to be. We are three. We are three, we are the neutral, we are the light, and we are the dark. I conjure and open what is sought to be. Open what is required as the fires burn for what is desired. Right? Because again, we are conjuring up things that are trying to be open. We are trying to set pathways. We are trying to establish the conditions. We are doing that within ourselves. We are doing that outside of ourselves. When you do the rite of transformation, you internalize these energies so that you don't need to use the external anchors. But when you have those energies internal to you, you then use the anchors external to you. And again, it creates informational overlay. You're creating more density. You have a deeper understanding of these mechanical situations in action. You are demonstrating in action the principles that I am talking about. So it doesn't matter if you're not aware of all of the layers and the dimensions, but once you become aware of all of the layers and the dimensions of whatever action you are doing that causes change in the environment, if you are selling a product, if you are interacting with a person, if you are creating any kind of change in any environment, that is a spell. Period. The end. It creates these overlay moments. It creates these black holes of intensity where you can then bring life to those principles. You can then do it by the ancient ways. You can do it the way that they mixed blood and clay and dirt and water and all of the things to come up with the human body. So that way we can be an intermediary between the intangible dimensions. So that if all of life and universal matter was to compress in a life principle, that would be what mankind is, humankind is, right? The human body, the awareness of it, is separate from the physical body, right? You can have brain damage and you lose your sense of self. That sense of self is built upon the electricity that moves through your body. The spirit that moves through you is that path of flow as it connects to the origin. The more entwined you are with origin energy, the more the prime energy of who and what you are, right? You as that 13th individual operating in a sphere of 12 gives you that ability to then go back and say, this is the thing I want to create for my people. This is the thing I want to do for my friends. This is the thing I want to use, and these are the methods by which I serve. That's how we establish these traditions. That's how we establish these paths of flow, so that as we bring life and as we bring death to those spell constructs, that we have given them a time, we have given them a place, we let them loose in creation so that they can then go off and create endlessly new creations, new potentials, right? When you're making a golem in ritual magic, you only want to let it live around for a specific amount of time. Otherwise, it develops a consciousness and a life of its own. Now, they don't like this to happen in controlled situations because it becomes a wild card. If you have a golem and you let it loose in creation, you don't know what the hell will happen when it starts interacting and doing things on its own. You don't have a leash for it because you've given it free will. So when you mix your sperm with something, when you mix vital fluid, when you mix menstrual fluid with something, you are giving it a separate creation from yourself. When you are giving it your blood, you are giving it as an extension of yourself. So you maintain control. It is not a wild card. You affect control because there is a blood-to-blood sympathy link. Your blood, your will, your way. Right? Period. You consume the blood, you engage with the blood, whatever it is with blood, then it becomes beholden to the one who controls the blood or the mind of the blood, period, the end. And in that way, dominance is developed. Period. It is a non-negotiable fact of hierarchy. These are distinct markers of hierarchy. They are not intangibles. If you create something, if you bind it to your blood as a DNA ladder, you can then, if you carry that blood, open it up in any form you need to, in any way you need to, regardless of the damage that occurs to your body. I did that with the rite of transformation. I did that to cultivate this body so that damage that happens to it, I can still maintain the energy of my spirit that will allow me to continue to operate and to continue to function. So that way I can produce these types of changes for my friends, my family, my clients, whatever it is that I need to do. And in so doing, I demonstrate the path of the magician, of the sorcerer, right? Now, the thing you have to do is figure out how are you going to replicate this for your own work? What will it look like? What will it be? How will it take that form? How will you become that place of neutrality? So that way, as you do those neutral things, right? As you step into the middle, as you create from those arrangements, right? Let's see if I can find it in here. Right? What is it that you step into? What is it that you create? What is it that you consecrate as your vessel? Right? What do you strip out of it? What do you engender within it? Right? What will you resurrect yourself to be? These are very useful things to consider. And as you consider them, as you play with these ideas in your own work and understand that time goes very, very deep, and it's only in relation to the stars and the zones as we understand it, not as a physical location in space, but like the fixed stellar zodiac. And why it's so important is because the fixed star arrangements gives you bearing. It gives you bearing for behavior. So that way, when you're on a planet, you can then go back and see, okay, well, under this time, if it's a precessional location, right? You use precessional zodiacs to determine where things are in the timeline based on their relative location to the energies as you understand them from the place you came from. So you can undergo the conversion math. So you can understand, okay, well, on that planet, it was understood to be Aries. On Skyrim, it's understood to be whatever. On whatever planet that these people on this earth are channeling the various dimensions of, calling it fiction, calling it fantasy, when they're in state writing their character stories, when they're in state writing their dimension stories, and they're producing these fictions and these fantasies, and they're channeling these intangible stories, right? You can examine them not as intangible fictions, but as dimensional pathways that through the right conditions and through the right applications of understanding what imaginary places do what, you can then use these kinds of calculations to pull energy out of those things, and you can bring whatever is in fiction into this plane. So through the narrative of form, you give your magic body, and you give it story, and you give it purpose. And by that purpose, you've given it a spirit. And by that spirit, it can interact. And therefore, you have created a spirit of interaction that takes on a form which you have given it through a narration. That is the end of it. That is time. That is the source magic. And so by understanding these things, by applying these things in every single thing we do, we become sorcerers. We become masters of our creation, right? We are not responsible for the work and actions of others outside of our ritual chamber. That is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is only what we do in that ritual chamber once all of the anchors are set up, once all of the intent is created, once the great gates are open. Because once we do that, we have committed to bringing that energy onto this planet. We can do it in small ways. We can do it in stages. We can do it in process. We can do it testing to see which way works best. Which way can you get the change in conversation to manifest? Which way can you produce these things? So again, we're going to go back to the magical method. We're going to go back to the thing that I developed for 2020. We're going to go back to the path of sorcery and the ingredients so that you can study the path of yin and the yang and the applications of these things. So as you're moving through, you can create the blends, you can create the powders, you can create the celestial applications and the alignment mechanics. So that way you know your relative space on Earth in relation to the fixed star of the planet as the sun, right? So you use the sun as the gate of origin, or the moon as the gate of origin, or whatever planetary body, but there's still going to be the locations in space-time as it relates to the Milky Way, because all of these things apply based on celestial flow patterns. It's based on where we are at, which door we open, how we open it, and what we create with those things. So by doing that, we understand that the conversation between you and the ingredients are what connects you to the path that will create and consider these ingredients. Okay, so step one, if I must change something, what would that transformation look like? And what would I use? I'd use European mandrake root, I'd use Langel or Lojon, I'd use maidenhair fern. If I was going to use spell ingredients to move the spell, Althea, that's going to be the amplification of intent. White pine will set the path for it. Olive will set the path of energy, right? So why is holy oil made with olive oil? Because it sets the flow, right? Why is holy oil made out of olive oil? Is because the ingredient it's made out of creates the blood of the earth, because the tree sap is the ancestral blood of the earth itself in physical form. If we are the embodiment of spirit in flesh, then the embodiment of the earth itself in a life pattern is the tree. It is the change from death states into a new type of life, right? And then what do we do with the recipes? How do we create the recipes? Well, this is how I create the recipes. This is how I create to teach on the recipes. And then there's the reason for why I wanted to study challenges, and the challenge event is because if you can create an event around the emotion that you're trying to develop to create the path of understanding, so that way you can carve back a way to your mind, a way for your spirit and your body to regain itself after damage, after loss, after change. You then operate under the application of unity and the purification and the restoration of that principle of unity in action, so that by these actions we create, and by our creation we generate, and by our generation we get to understand the deeper meanings. We get to understand the elements in their relation. We get to understand the earth, the air, the fire, the water. We get to understand patterning, how we can use these patterns, rising and setting of the sun, tidal flows. These are the things that we can do in magic that will allow us to go into the deeper things, so that way we can go into the Gnosticism. We can go into the internal relationship between our gnosis of what we experience as the individual and how we can relate to those things in creation with those energies, right? and then getting into the compression and density. So that way we can understand, we can seek to understand, and by our understanding, we can create. We can create supplemental spells, we can create primary spells, we can create preliminary spells, we can create prerequisite spells, we can create path working, we can create all of the things to get you to what you need to do. So that way, by the time that you create the spell itself, or by the time you've got a client work that's done, or by the time that you do the spell itself, right? Whatever that thing is, you have engendered within it all of the density of creation itself, all of the meaning and understanding of time and the physical location in the universe. So that way you can open the great gates, and from that gate you create, and by that creation you live, and by that you live in a body, and by that body you have something much, much bigger. You have how that body interacts with the world and how that creation of the world relates. So yes, prerequisite spellcraft. I do these spells. I did this one 7 times, I think, sorry. One for each of the principal planets, right? Each of the different arrays here with the 9 Norse worlds, using each of those as experiential conditions, carved and made with the blood and all of those things, right? With the trigrams in these 3 states to create the opening patterns. So that way, when I'm opening up time, I can fold it between the relationships of the planets in their states as they're relating to the time of the planetary energies and their relationship to the fixed points of origin that I've created here. So that whatever spell that I put in the center of this, whatever thing I do at the center of this will activate the gate of time as it relates to the ingredients that I made this particular array out of in its original form. So what's in this book is not the original form. The original form is an array that I keep in a book outside of the internet, right? Same with the array of the all. If I'm going to create, again, it's what I create in the center point. That's when my arrays are open. We're opening up creation. We're demonstrating creation in these moments. We're applying it in these moments. So that way we can then anchor spirits. We can use this sort of patterning to forge a thing. And then we can observe that thing. And then we can walk on that thing. We can set up time between what was, what we want to have happen, and what is now, so that by what is now, we know what was and what's going to be, so that way we can open the path inside. So that way when we understand and we can control it, we then have not only 3 states here, but then we can put that back into the hypercube and figure out where it is in that cube we want to go based on all of those things and their interactions. So we study flow. We study the manifestations of origin. We study all of these various things based on the day of the week, what letter of the day that those correspond to, and the letters of those arrangements on the squares of the planets. So these here are the Latin letters that correspond to the planetary applications as understood using Pythagorean numerology combined with Kabbalistical application. So this is the magic the Jews knew. This is the magic the high priests knew. This is the magic the Egyptians knew. This is the stuff of ancient cultures. This is how you do it in English. This is how you use math to describe it. This is how you use sorcery to change fate, is because you're using density, you're using ingredients, you're using compression, you're creating alchemy, you're creating flow patterns, you're creating all of these things to develop yourself, so that way what you move forward with is a specific method. It's one you create, it's one you establish, it's one you balance, so that way you walk your path of unity. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day what creation methods that you use, what powders that you use, what oils that you do, which way it flows, what celestial alignment that you pick. It's a conversation between you and creation. What will it say? What will you say? That's what magic asks. It gives you a voice to talk to God. If you wanted to talk to God with your magic, what would you want it to say? Thaumaturgy is miracle working, because with the thom concept, with the magic concept, with the energy principles behind it, You're driving the force of creation to interact with the intelligent machine that is creation. So you can find out where you fit. You can find out what you need to do. You can ask it to give you more fortune. You can ask it to change the energy patterns around you so that the opportunities provide for you the person that you want to interact with, the lover that's going to be the best for you, the job situation that's going to provide the best opportunities so that way you can learn the best ways to go about life in the pattern that you're living your life in under the story that you understand it as. And that's where the dimensional tarot comes in, is because if you understand what dimension of space that you're in, using these kinds of understandings of how to calculate for dimensions themselves and what world and story that you're coming from, when you approach divination, what story are you telling yourself inside? What is the private dialogue between you and your soul? What do you know to be as fact as God that moves through you, that is the external conduit, the giant power source of creation that allows you to do what you do, right? Without that flow, you have nothing but a shell, right? And so that's the principle of creation in the Klipothic understanding. The creation of the shell is what God did to divide himself from himself, to create a place where he was not, so that he could then fill itself with himself, and then he could be inside the creation that he created, right? So that way we can then replicate that alchemical process of, I'm not this thing. I'm going to create something where I am not. I am then going to insert myself into that thing to see how I fit and how I can become. And in so that process of becoming, do I engender a much, much larger energy of the divine principle of what we know to be God, to be the Tao, to be that never-ending flow, that you're stepping in a river, it's wet, it's moving, it's gone. Like, it doesn't stay the same. You don't stay the same. It doesn't stay the same. Time and everything moves. It's motion, it's development. It will never stop going in any form. Never will it stop, right? But you can control which way it goes based on how you build your own timeline, based on how you build from your own understandings of it, what you seek to understand and apply as God in that moment, right? So when you create a spell, you act as God, as the intermediary vessel in physical form. It is less to do with you as an individual body, more to do with what you've created as the experience compression as it drops. Think about it like a really cosmic, celestial, atomic blast. It's going to rip apart creation at the very fundamental levels, rearrange it, and make it something new. What that something new will look like is very much dependent on the energy and the compression that you can produce for it in those moments of your understanding, so that way you have those methods. You understand the magic. So that by the time that you're done with these things, by the time that you have all of your ducks in a row when it comes to understanding and the applications of magic and energy in the marketplace, right? Whatever marketplace, whatever world you're going to produce it for, by doing these things and explaining these things, if you understand that all of my work is based on flow patterns and math, and you can get really, really into it, or you can start having the conversations, the more you understand about how these things are layered, the more you can internalize these things, the more you can coherently express these things to others, the better off your manifestations will be. And so by those manifestations, you seek to create God in the world, right? You seek to do the work of God. You seek to do the work of heaven. You seek to do by virtue, not by pleasure. By seeking the higher path, not by inflicting pain on others, right? Like, these are the things that we need to work for. These are the things that we need to strive for. So that way, even if we have to do something based on entropy and the destruction of useless information, right? Well, it's not that information itself is useless. It's just the structure in which it's provided is crap. So if you give it a structure and you put it to the test, to see what it can do and see how it can do it. That's the great work of a magician, of an alchemist, to see what can you do with these principles in action. What is it that you will do moving forward? How will you apply these principles in your own life? How will you take the knowledge of time and the compression of it, and you can go through Peter Carroll's work and you can study his models of what are the great movement makers of magic, right? What are the 8 spell principles? There's a whole bunch of spell principles, but there's math for it, right? You can have that math, you can have that understanding. What is it that you want to do in those times and in those things? And so understanding the stories is why you have the dimensional tarot, is why you have the tarot itself, and is why you have the lens through which you can seek to become. And by gate openings and path workings, you can choose that path of becoming. So that's it for today. I appreciate you for listening, and I do wish you the best of luck on your journey through time. And I hope that you engage the sources on whatever world you end up walking on, because this is going to be fun. I can't wait to see what happens. Bye for now, y'all.